Hi there. Today I plan on doing something about my centerboard that seems to get stuck all the time. And perhaps fix another thing or two on this canoe yawl. So the first thing we are going to do is to get the centerboard out of its case. This leak is probably one of the reasons for my trouble. The laminate has cracked. Let's put the boat back on the trailer to wait out warmer outdoor temperatures and start building a new centerboard instead. I will use steel plates to get the board heavy and make it easier to lower down into water. From this 0.8 mm thick plate I can take out the two sides. I cut out a slot for the lift wheel that is located on the upper side of the centerboard. Following the outline of the previous centerboard, I continue to cut out the shape until I have one side finished. I repeat the process for the other side until both sides are ready. I also need thicker sheets of steel plate for the inside. I plan on forming a wing shape using smaller pieces of steel plate. To reduce the weight on land, I plan on creating an open void in the center. This will also be contained with the thicker steel plates. So I cut out the material I need for this from 2 mm thick steel plates. In order for the plates to bind well with epoxy, I introduce some tracks in the surface before I head inside. To wipe off the protective grease that the plates are smeared in, I use ethanol as it's less dangerous. But it doesn't work for the plastic marks on the plates. After trying a steel brush, I have to move on to the heavy stuff. With white spirits, the plastic and the glue are gone in no time. For strength, I also need some plywood that I shape to the upper side of the centerboard. This is the area that will take the most bending load. And as this area of the board is also the last into the water, it doesn't need to be heavy. I want to pre-bend the steel plate. So I bend the plate around the old centerboard with clamps. I also install drainage holes to let water in and out. These will be at the lowest and highest point on the board. I also need to measure out the swing hole. This needs to be at the exact same location as the old board. Otherwise the board will not fit with the old case. Having prepared all, I start adding pure epoxy to the inside of the plate. Adding glass and wet this out. I continue on the rest of the plate. Using a roller helps removing air. Having covered the inside cover, I can add the side walls around the board. For the next step, I add a heavy modifier to the epoxy. I use this to keep the epoxy in place under the side plates. In between the wall layers, I add glass. This will fill out some of the voids and also strengthen the board. It also adds some height so that the 4 layers of steel plate will result in a height similar to the plywood. I keep the plates aligned with a stick through the swing hole. Here in the back end I will face the board. In the front end I strengthen with some extra plates. I keep adding pieces to the construction until all side walls and inner walls are in place. Then I clamp everything in place. And where clamps do not reach, I add buckets until all is secure in position. The day after I can remove the clamps and clean cut the edge before moving outdoor for some sanding. I want to get a smooth outside and inside before I can close the board all the way down to the side surface, so I can move inside again. Mix more epoxy so I can laminate the inside walls. This is important to eliminate the risk for corrosion of the steel. There can be no place where the steel is exposed to salt water. I also add some wood to have something to screw into and finish with smoothing out everything. Now I can prepare the other outside. To fit the sides together I also need to clean cut the inside walls before I prepare more epoxy to laminate the thin other outside with glass. I also add epoxy to the receiving side before I add them together and clamp all securely. The day after I clean up the edges. To reduce the risk for that heating from sanding destroys the epoxy, I sand in short bursts and ventilate in between. Inside again, I prepare to glass in the outside and fill the small gaps that remain between the two layers before I put glass on the side. Here on the top side of the board I use thin glass. I don't expect this side to ever be exposed to impacts. The big outside will be more exposed. Here I add more glass. There will still not be much impact, but the side forces will be strong. Thus I add an extra 300 gram per square meter cloth to increase the strength, and a third layer on top of all. When all is wetted out, it's just to clean cut the edge and I'm almost done with this board. In the next building episode I will try to fix a crack in the bottom of the boat. Please join me then.